What about now? I said there was going to be a collection, but you didn't hear that. Just wanted to welcome all of you to St. Barnabas Catholic Church. It's amazing the people that are here representing truly God's work, God's vineyard. Father Boyle brought a couple of friends from LA and they're saying how cold it is here. They haven't seen nothing yet. But welcome, and may this evening be a great moment of grace for all of us. Thank you.
Barnabas parishioner and member of Southside Catholic Peace and Justice Team. On behalf of almost 50, yes, 50 organizations, churches, and faith groups, I want to welcome you tonight. And we are ready. We have had pop-up book clubs all over the neighborhood for Tattoos on the Heart. Over 150 people came out to watch the G-Dog movie at Barnabas and CK. Bethlehem Evangelical Lutheran made Boundless Compassion the center of their Lenten study. And Bookies, our fabulous independent local bookstore, had to reorder cases of Father Greg's books 3 times. Our Barnabas teachers have all read the books together. We're ready. Tonight is our 3rd neighbor event, and again, our church is full. It's full partly because in Beverly Morgan Park, we know about being good neighbors. Strong community is in our DNA. It's our thing. It's most visible when there is a sick child, a family in need, or as I experienced firsthand a few weeks ago when we lost our dad, a family in mourning. The love, food, prayers, support, more food we received overwhelmed my family. It was incredible. Through these neighbor events and in close collaboration with our partners, we're working hard to take that beautiful expression of community past just my parish, my faith, my race, my class. Those narrowed categories build fences that manifest there is an us and there is a them. We get locked into narratives that dehumanize those we see different than us. And this isn't unique to Beverly Morgan Park, which is why the church is full of people not only from here, but from all over our city. We're here because despite the loud and constant drumbeat, we know there can't be an us and a them, safe, dangerous, good guys and bad guys. We're here because we know something is wrong when outside this church, there's a beautiful neighborhood where our kids ride bikes carefree down leafy streets, and about 2 miles away, kids their same age sometimes can't even play outside for fear of being shot or consumed by violence. At our first event in 2017, we heard from 3 faith leaders, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, who reminded us that each tradition doesn't just suggest, but commands us to love the neighbor. It's not mentioned once or twice, but dozens and dozens of times across the Bible, Torah, and the Quran. This church is full because even if we're fearful and pulled in different directions, we know in our core that we belong to one another. Father Greg knows we belong to one another and gives us story after story in his books that prove it. Who else knows this? Our partners here tonight. Mercy Home for Boys and Girls has known this for over 100 years. Arab American Family Services works hard every day on this. Chicago Beyond is changing the game and investing in innovative programs that know this. Advocate Trauma Center, right here on 95th and Western, knows this, as does the Blue House and all our faith partners. I wanted to mention 2 women who live this are with us tonight, and their lives have been dedicated to the idea that we belong to one another. They helped found the Sukasa Catholic Worker to help torture victims from Central America. They helped found Casa Notre Dame, the David Darst Center for Social Justice Education, and the Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants. Mercy Nuns, Sister Joanne Kirsch, and Sister Pat Murphy. They almost missed the event because they were getting arrested in Washington at an immigration protest. Can you imagine if these women ran the Catholic Church? Okay, that's a whole other event, and we're going to do that at another time. But it's no secret for the Catholics here that we have so much pain in our church. Pain and anger and leadership for cover-ups and scandals that have rocked us to our core. But we also know that we, the people, are the church, and we gather like this to show our leaders that in addition to the healing the victims deserve, we want to get back to the real work of the church. For those of you who have read Father Greg's books, we long to get back to the original program, standing with those on the margins, the demonized, and anyone else who has to carry more than they can bear. This is the work of our church, and it's shared by our partners in faith, shared by the groups who helped host this evening, and shared by our speakers, who have all seen a need in their communities and done something about it. The first is rabbinical student Tamar Manasseh, who saw a need and founded Mothers and Men Against Senseless Violence to put eyes on the streets to replace violence and crime with meaningful community. Their mission is to be a force that empowers us to be the voice of change, safety, and presence for our families and our communities. As individuals join together, many voices are amplified as one. Tamar, come on up.
5 minutes, so I'm going to try to do this quick. My name is Tamama Nessa. I am the founder and president of Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killings, or MASS. And I was so inspired by the words of the choir that they sang. The call, we are called. We are called. And I didn't know that I was called until just a few years ago, because I am a deeply flawed individual, deeply. And I came to understand that God does not call the qualified, but God qualifies those he calls. That's what it is. So I'm looking around, and I'm no Moses, I'm no Jacob, I'm no Abraham, I'm no Sarah. Although I may have a baby when I made it, but that's a whole other story. But none of these people who God called, none of them. I'm just a mom. I'm just a mom who didn't want to lose a kid. That's all I am. And what can I do? What do you do in a city like Chicago to save your kids when you're just a mom? You do what moms do. You mom them. You get out and you mom. You love them. You parent kids who may not have ever been parented before. You teach kids who have never been anybody's kids before how to be children. You restore order. You get in their business, because moms are great at that. And when I wrote my first piece for the New York Times, they wanted to know, how did we reduce violence by sitting on a corner in Inglewood? How did you do this? Just sitting on a corner. Well, first of all, I'm there every day. And I bring free food. I barbecue every single day. We feed at least 150 people, 7 days a week, every single day in the summer. And we all know that teenagers are poor and they're always hungry. So free food, that's how you do it. But it's not just that. It is the care and the concern. It is the showing up consistently every single day. And so, when I was explaining to my editor, she kept sending back edits. I don't understand what you say. You say you just go sit on the corner and you cook food and crime stops. And I'm like, yeah, that's how it goes. She's like, well, how do you do it? First I take the lawn chair out of my car. That's step 1. 2, I put it on the corner. I get my barbecue grill. I sit in my chair. Somebody comes and cooks because I can't barbecue. I'm not allowed to touch the thing. But this is how it works. But nobody can believe that it's that simple, because stopping violence and ending gun violence, especially in this city, has to be far more complicated than people showing up and caring. It has to be more complicated than that, right? We need someone else to come in and do it for us. We need to hire more people to do it for us. It's not in this room. It's out there. It's at a police district. It's in Washington. It's everywhere but in this room. And you don't have to be paid to care. What I've heard is more times than not, it's the people who don't get paid to care the most. But the thing is, on my block, the called are moms from Hyde Park, who are art teachers who stop by every day to do artwork with the kids. There are moms from Rogers Park who come by and teach the kids how to play instruments. There are dads who work at Ford who come and sit on the block and play football and teach a kid how to throw a tight spiral when he gets off work. That's who the called are. Everybody in this room is the called. We are all the called. The solution to the problems that Chicago suffers from are in this room right now. We are that right. Every last one of you on a block somewhere, in a neighborhood somewhere, that needs you, that needs whatever it is that you teach, whatever it is that you can share. If you can do karaoke, you're an acrobat, if you're a soccer coach, whatever you do, bring it to a place where nobody brings those things, and watch how much of a change that you can be in the world. You'll see it for yourself. Thank you.
And I'm sure you've all seen, but on the back of your programs, you will see that we have contact information for everybody here to get you out on that block. Our next speaker is Jamal Cole, whose mission is to build an interconnected Chicago on the pillars of service and education. He is the founder, creator, and CEO of the city's fastest growing social impact organization, My Block, My Hood, My City, an exposure-based education program for teens and a network of volunteer initiatives. Traveling, youth mentorship, and community organizing are just some of the things that keep Jamal busy these days. Welcome, Jamal.
This microphone is better. I ain't selling no drugs or nothing. And that's what the bucket boy said when I pulled up to the light at 87 in Lafayette. I ain't selling no drugs or nothing. That was his sales pitch. I rolled down my window, I said, excuse me? He said, yeah, I ain't selling no drugs or nothing. I said, so the fact that you aren't selling drugs, that qualifies you to be paid? His friend said, yeah. Ain't like we out here trying to rob nobody. I said, so the fact that you didn't rob me, that entitles you for compensation? He said, look, I ain't got no job, man. Ain't nobody trying to hire me because I got a felony on my record. Plus my parents ain't around. I gotta be the backbone, take care of my little sister. The backbone, he said. And look, I'm a student of effective communication. So I like this sales pitch, right? Ain't selling no drugs or nothing, that's an effective sales pitch. If you're trying to make some ashtray change, you know what I mean? Like, if you're trying to make some real money, take care of your little sister. Hey, the real question is, why aren't you selling no drugs or nothing, man? Entry-level pharmaceutical reps, they making $65K a year plus bonuses. Hey, he didn't lack the hustle. Look, the sheer grit and determination it takes to spark up a conversation with a complete stranger on 87th Street, dodge lights on 95th, and make a sales presentation before the light turns green. And that demonstrated he had the skills. Why wasn't he selling drugs or nothing? He said, I'm just trying to make some money. Ain't nobody ever gave me nothing. My parents ain't go to college. The city is messed up. The cops is messed up. These guys said, hold up. Disappointments aren't reserved for bucket boys on 87th Street. What about the bucket boys on 35th? What about the bucket boys on 47th? Some of their parents ain't go to college too, right? It had to rain on them today too, right? He said, I'm just trying to make some money, man. And I said, look, your problem's not money. Your problem is a lack of idea on how to make more money. I said, show me a list of goals in your phone right now. Where's your list of well thought out goals? He said, I don't have it. I said, we gotta start right there. Having a list of goals will change everything for you. Hey, if you don't got a list of goals in your phone, I can guess how much money is in your bucket within 25 hours. He said, you can guess all that by goals? I said, yeah. You need daily goals, weekly goals, monthly goals, annual goals, personal goals, business goals, family goals, educational goals. How did this kid get this way? Are we crippling these kids' motivation by giving them $1 in their bucket? Am I subsidizing his failure? And do we as a community, do we have a responsibility for that type of behavior? Yeah, I think we do. Kids are always telling me, look, I'm a product of my environment. I'm a victim of my circumstances. Hey, I think you're a product of your expectations. But I do think your environment affects your well-being, right? I run an after-school program with youth that have never been downtown, never seen the lake, never waited for a taxi. They've never been on the new elevators with no buttons, right? They've never been on them things. They never had a boarding pass. And we take them on field trips. We got a 15-passenger van, so I drop them off. I dropped a young lady off on 13th and Christiana out west. When we pulled up to her house, there was yellow crime scene tape from her apartment all the way to the alley. And when we pulled up, the other kids in the car, they said, oh man, that's just yellow tape. It ain't serious unless it's the red tape. That's when you know it's been a body. The kids were like, true. These kids was 15 years old and they was already forensic scientists. Next kid we dropped off out south on 63rd and Western. As soon as he got out of the car, he ran to his house, 4 houses down, like he was a shooter. That's how many shooters went on his block. Carl Lewis out the van. Last person we dropped off back out west on 55th and West North, right next to the El Gran Burrito. Before, his name was Kendall. I said, Kendall, before you get out the car, take some of these McDonald's bags with you. Respect the van, we gotta clean up. Kendall, he grabbed 4 or 5 McDonald's bags. As soon as he stepped out of the car, threw all the bags on the ground like it was a piece of gum. It's the same motion. Threw 4 McDonald's value meal bags on the ground. It got me thinking, it's like, man, how many times do you have to see yellow crime scene tape before your takeaway is, oh, it's summertime? How many times do you have to hear gunshots before you become desensitized? You tell yourself they firecrackers, you go back to sleep like Eric. How many times do you walk by a vacant lot full of trash before you become disengaged? You just don't even notice the trash is there. And if you're pushing a stroller with a baby in it through that lot, does the baby grow up thinking the trash is regular? Hey, the answer is yes. Environment affects your well-being. It just eats away at your physical reflexes, man. You go to the hospital and the doctor, he hits your knee with a reflex hammer. He's trying to see if there's something wrong with their central nervous system. If he hits your knee with that reflex hammer and there's no knee-jerk reaction, something's wrong. If you walk in front of your crib and there's trash out front, you don't pick, something's wrong. If you hear gunshots going on your block, you don't call the cops, something's wrong. Something's wrong with the community's nervous system, man. It's like you go to somebody's house and you ever been to somebody's house, you're watching TV, and a mouse run out right in front of the TV? Right? And it happens so fast you can't even act like you ain't see it. You're just like, oh, right? And the person's house that is, they so used to having mice, right? There's no reaction. There's no jolts of fear. There's no shame or embarrassment. They have no physical reflexes. Pretty soon, a couple minutes later, the mouse comes back out. He says, come on here, y'all. It's safe. They don't mind. They ain't got no physical reflexes. They used to things being decrepit. We can get all the crumbs we want. That's what the drug dealer says on 79th and Cottage. He serves his drugs all month. Next month he tells his friends, come on out here, y'all. The store owner don't mind, it's safe. He ain't got no physical reflexes. He used to things being decrepit. We can sell all the drugs we want. That's what the cops say. Come to the community, shoot a kid down 16, they don't mind, just look at it. This community ain't got no physical reflexes. They used to things being decrepit. We can do whatever we want. It's not regular, man. It's not regular for German Shepherds to be sniffing me on 79th Street every morning. It's not regular for helicopters to be flying on top of my house. They float like dragonflies every day. It's not regular to have to order your food through bulletproof glass windows. If y'all had to order your food through bulletproof glass windows, you'd be traumatized.
Yes.
It's not regular to walk inside the Walgreens and all the cough syrup is locked up.
Yeah.
It's not regular for every billboard in my community to promote cheap divorces and $6,000 tax advances. It's not regular for there to be 15 currency exchanges and no banks. How am I supposed to save? It's not regular for there to be a liquor store in every other corner. I might as well get drunk. It's not regular for there to be a holding cell in the basement of a funeral home. I saw somebody the other day get buried in a Louis Vuitton casket. A fake Louis Vuitton, that's not regular. It's not regular for kids to have to put a clear backpack on, take their shoes off and their belts off to get to the school. It's not regular for young girls to go to the bathroom in the school, ain't no toilet paper, ain't no tissue. They gotta be expected to learn in filth. It's not regular. Paddy wagons parked outside the front of the school. It's not regular for ATMs to have a $20 limit. And they say my program, they say we work with at-risk youth. Man, the integrity of this city is at risk. If we aren't supporting programs like My Block, My Hood, My City.
Our next speaker, Father David Kelly, is here from Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation in the Back of the Yards neighborhood. We'd also like to recognize the staff and community here from Precious Blood and their amazing work. They work as agents of healing and reconciliation with those who have been impacted by violence and conflict. Their ministries reach out to the victim, the wrongdoer, and the community to create a safe space where healing can begin, and people can find the support and encouragement needed to begin reconciliation. Kelly?
I was given a talk on the north side a few weeks ago, a parish, a smaller crowd than this. But after I gave my talk and I talked about violence and incarceration, a little bit of our work, at the end there was a question and answer period. And an alderman from the north side stood up and he said to me, you know, I was robbed a while back and I really didn't want the young man to go to prison, but I never had an opportunity to really confront him. And they went on to say, and you know what, even more, during that trial when he was found guilty, he never said he was sorry, never shared any remorse. The thing is, I knew and know that young man. I'm chaplain at Juvenile Detention Center at Cook County Jail. And I remember that young man. We do a restorative justice practice in Juvenile Detention Center using drums, and we sit and we create these spaces and places where you can keep it real. Where young men who are locked up, being tried as adults, can find a time and space to say how they're truly feeling, and not have that front that they have to carry. And I remember that young man, when we sat in that circle, he said over and over again that the only thing he wanted to do was tell the victim of his case how sorry he was. But that his lawyer and the courts said, don't ever say that you're guilty. Don't ever admit your harm. And so this alderman who was a victim walked away unsatisfied. This young 17-year-old young man walked away to prison. And the next case was called. I've been working in jails and detention centers all my adult life before I was a priest. And I also have been living after ordination in parishes and communities that have been impacted by violence and incarceration. And in those places, oftentimes I'd accompany families who lose their children to extreme sentences. You know, in the United States, we try our children as adults, even though science tells us that 14-year-olds think like 14-year-olds. So treat them as 14-year-olds. But we, in our criminal justice system, decide that they should be tried as adults. And so I'd accompany a lot of families who would lose their children to extreme sentences. 35, 40, 50 years, life without the possibility of parole. And I would sit with them after the sentencing and the trauma that they felt. But because I lived in a community that was impacted by violence, and also did funerals, many funerals of 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. And because you live in the community, you know both sides oftentimes. You know the person who was harmed, but you also know the person who did the harm. And in some of those cases, it was really personal. A young man, Alberto, used to come after school every day. My office is on the second floor of the building that uses the after-school program. And he'd come up and he'd sneak up the back stairwell, getting out of school, getting out of tutoring, and just sit in my office for a minute and talk, till I kind of force him back downstairs to his tutor. I got a call one day, 5 minutes after he'd left, that he'd been shot. So I go to the scene, and from the scene to a hospital. Because one of the bullets hit his heart, I sat with his family for hours and days, hoping and praying that Alberto would survive. About day 4 or 5, he began to recuperate, and the police came to his hospital room, and they had that manila file folder that they always carry. And they opened the manila file folder, and stapled in the corner of that manila file folder was a photo of the man they had in custody, the young man they had in custody. And when they opened that file folder, I recognized Wilfredo, a young man who I knew him and his family very well. The police left. I sat with Alberto and his mom for a little while longer. Then I made my way to Cook County Jail, Division 9, the maximum security part of the jail, and I walked into the day room, and Wilfredo was sitting to afar, and he saw me come in, and he had that look that, damn, I knew you were coming. By that time, he knew the person he shot was someone I knew, somebody part of the parish. But he also had to look like there's somebody who cares about me coming into this space, a pet space that is so very violent and so very hard to deal with. And so we would talk. And I would go from that jail cell to that hospital room. I would go from visiting Wilfredo in the jail cell, and I'd go to the hospital room to visit Alberto. And the thing about it is that Alberto knew that when I left his hospital room, that I was going to go to the jail to visit the person who shot him. And Wilfredo knew that when I left that jail cell, that I was going to the hospital to visit the young man who ultimately would testify against him in court. And they understood that. That's what you do when you're part of a community. You strive with all your might to embrace people who are in pain, who are hurting. We don't turn our backs on one another. About 2.5 years later, when we went to the trial, I went with Alberto and his mom. We sat in a small room adjacent to the courtroom because you can't hear the testimony of other witnesses, because Alberto was going to be a witness against Wilfredo. And I sat in that small courtroom, and in that small courtroom, a young state's attorney comes in, and he's going to prep Alberto for his testimony. He says, now this is what I want you to say. He says, we want to send this kid away for the rest of his life, so you got to say it like this. And he kept saying, we're going to send him away. That's what we want to do. But I knew Wilfredo. I loved Wilfredo and his family. And after a while, I just leaned over to Alberto and said, Alberto, just tell the truth. And this young state's attorney gets very angry at me for interfering with his testimony, his preparation. And anybody who knows me very well knows if I get very angry, I turn very red. And then a few choice words might come out. We went to trial. Wilfredo was found guilty. He received 27 years in prison. They ushered him back into the jail, locked up. Everybody left, and Alberto, myself, and Mom sat in that courtroom, and we ultimately left. They went to their apartment, I went to my office. I sat in my office, I couldn't help but think, we can do better than this. During that whole time, 2.5, 3 years or better, no one ever said to Alberto, Alberto, how you doing? Or to the mom, is there anything we can do for you? All the energy, all resources was directed to Wilfredo on how good we can get him, how many years we can give him, how much we can punish him. And I said, as a church, try to be faithful. As a community person who lives in a community, we can do better than this. So in 2002, I had the opportunity to begin with some others, missionaries for Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. It's a restorative justice organization, embracing restorative justice, because that best embraces the gospel message of reconciliation, where you look at one another not as strangers, not as an other, but as a brother and sister, as a neighbor. And you build relationships that have been strained and stressed and broken. Precious Blood works with young people and families who have been impacted by violence and incarceration. We create spaces and places in the neighborhood. A neighborhood, 51st and Racine, just a little bit north of here, that knows this kind of violence. And we create these spaces and places where people can come together and they can begin to speak their truth. And they can hear truth. And in those places and spaces, healing happens. We work with mothers a lot of times who lose their children to homicide. We sit in a circle. We create a safe enough space where moms can talk about what it's like to lose a child to homicide, with other moms who also have lost children to homicide. And in those spaces and places, weeping happens, but also laughter, connected. They're no longer alone and isolated in their pain. They're sitting with other people who know what it's like. There's community that forms in those places and spaces. I would sit with these moms. They knew I would go to the jail and juvenile. Couldn't quite get that out of their head, but they liked me, so what could they do? And they asked about the kids, the young people in jail. Do they ever say they're sorry? I said, yeah, they do. What do they say? I said, well, they talk about how they want to change. And they kept asking these questions about these young people. These moms who lost children to homicide were asking questions about these young people who were locked up. And I asked them, I said, come on, come on inside with me. Come and visit. Oh, they were going to do that. I said, tell you what, I have Mass there. Come for Mass. And these moms knew Mass. That was safe. And so they came inside, and we celebrated Eucharist in Juvenile Detention Center. And I had talked to some young people before and asked them if they would participate in the circle afterwards. Would they speak with these moms? Would they share a little bit of their story? They all said yes. And I assured them that they would be safe, that these moms really were moms, good people who would do them no harm. So after Mass, we sat in that circle. And we use a talking piece in the restorative justice practice called peacemaking circles. And the person who has the talking piece that we have here speaks, and the rest of us listen. And the moms picked up the talking piece, and they introduced themselves, but before they could get 2 or 3 words out, they began to weep. Because they were, the identity they carried was losing a child to homicide, and they wept, and the young men are looking, eyes wide open. And as that talking piece went around to the young men, they too told their story. They introduced themselves. One who didn't know his mom, another whose mom was in prison, and yet another mom who was addicted, and the stories went on and on. These moms who started like this began to lean in and started to connect with these young men, looking at them. And as that talking piece went around the circle, things changed. The moms started looking at these kids, saying things like, "Wow, like you're a beautiful kid. You've got so many gifts and talents." What happened in that space was that these moms came in thinking they're going to meet thieves and thugs. Well, what they met was young people who were also victims of violence. And they found a connectedness, and they built community with one another. I say to you, that's what can happen when we spend time creating safe enough spaces where we begin to look at one another differently and stop othering one another.
Amen.
And we build these spaces and places where people can recognize, damn, you're my brother. You're my sister. So Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation through radical hospitality, because our young people have been traumatized. There's a lot of trauma in their life, a lot of violence in their lives. They live out of that violence, hurt people, and so they come to the door sometimes. They're surly, they have an attitude. And we have to work really hard to try to create a space and place where they feel like it's okay to be them.
Yeah.
That they don't have to be anybody else. They don't have to pretend because this old white guy is there. That they can be themselves, and we honor that. I say to you, it's an amazing thing to watch someone who really feels that they are honored and that the dignity that they got from God is saw by other people.
Yes.
So Precious Blood is just a simple little organization. As Tamar said, it's not that complicated. You just love one another, and you create spaces and places where you can do that, and then you watch the miracles happen because of that. So we do a lot of things because we're told by our young people what they need. And one of those things they tell, hey, Kelly, help me get a job. And so we create these things, as does Homeboy Industries, to create spaces and places where people can really come together and work and learn what it means to work and be proud of what they have created. And so some of these things here are some of the things that the young men have made. We have Curtis and Rondell here who are screen printers, and so they make these things. And they can feel like, hopefully feel like, I hope they feel the pride that we have in them.
Yes.
So that they in turn can share that pride with others who perhaps don't experience it so often. And I suggest to us as church, whatever tradition we come from, that as church, we need to look at one another as sisters and brothers and create people who feel like they belong and walk away with a dignity of being a son or daughter of God.
Amen.
We're going to hear a song, no doubt a beautiful song, because Barnabas only do beautiful songs. And after that song, I am honored to welcome to the podium Larry and Jose, who came with Father Greg Boyle to share their stories with us. God bless.
Will of second chances found in your program. Women will sing verse 1, men will sing verse 2, all will sing verse 3.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. God bless y'all. I stand here tonight by the love of Christ. I'm grateful to have a second chance. I started off in LA County, city of Linwood, been an ex-gang member. Raised in the culture of gang violence. My mother, my father, my uncles, my aunties. So growing up, if you would have told me that the lifestyle I was living wasn't normal, I wouldn't have believed you. I didn't know what normal was until I went to prison at the age of 20. My mother was a single mother. She raised me and my two brothers, one older, one younger. And I started getting incarcerated in the juvenile system at age 11. And started using strong drugs at the age of 12. Started off with marijuana, went to PCP, and fell in love with it sadly. My father went to jail when I was 4 years old. He's still in prison to this day. I met him when I went to prison at the age of 20, the age after I turned 20. And in going to prison, I found myself by finding my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen.
But I didn't meet my father again until I was 21, when I went to prison. And I haven't saw him since, but we opened up a line of communication and got to corresponding. But in growing up, I grew up in an abusive home, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Getting abused by family members. Mother was working. So, in her working, me and my brothers basically followed one another. Me and my younger brother followed my older brother. And his role model was my uncles, my homeboys on the corner. So in following him, I just waited till he got a certain age and said, okay, I'm gonna do what he's doing when I get this age. And I did. I've been shot before. I've been jumped, been stabbed. And I stand here today grateful that I went through all that, because now I know how to turn around and relate to the person that's going through it now. And that's only by the love and grace of God. But the main thing that I learned through all this is because I'm where I'm at now, and looking back over my life after sitting in the cage for 20 years, or even longer than 20 years, starting at the age of 11, is that it's all about love. It's all about being present and hearing someone and just being there. Because each time I got out of prison, or each time I got out of the juvenile facility, I wanted somebody to be there for me. My father was in jail, my mother was working. So I just wanted somebody to walk with me and talk with me and hear my pain, hear my story, but no one was there. So what I did, I went back to my neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, I found more pain. So in going forward, I learned that it's a process, that everybody has that in common. Pain and joy. And more pain than joy, because this is a cold world. But on my way of getting out of prison, I've been out now 7 months in a halfway house. I got out March the 20th from the halfway house, and while I was in prison, I heard about Homeboy Industries, which is a lifesaver. Me, 40 years old, never having a job, never having a resume. I have one now. And walking through them doors, once I got out, I had another job opportunity to work at a restaurant, but something in my spirit kept saying, go to Homeboy Industries, because I heard about it in prison. So I went, and I walked through the doors at 8 in the morning, and when I walked through the doors, it's something like heaven. Because they have a morning meeting, a thought of the day, and a prayer, and people come in that door broken and hurting when they walk through the doors. You can see their face, you can feel their energy. And when I walked through, I bumped into a gang member, an ex-gang member, that was my enemy on the streets. And when I bumped into him, he turned around, and I was expecting, like, getting out of prison, you bump into somebody, it means something different. But when I bumped into him, he turned around and gave me a hug. Like, hey, how you doing? What you here for? My name Miguel. And I'm looking at him like, okay. And then he turned and said, I said, I'm here to get a job. He said, okay, sign up right here and put your name on the list. You're going to see Father Greg in a minute. I'm like, all right. Now, mind you, in prison, you're around guards and other people, so this guy right here is like a big white Santa Claus, right? So I go in there, and I'm sitting and I'm talking to him. He said, how you doing, son? I said, I'm doing all right. Come to get a job. I don't got a resume. I never had a job. I'm just getting out of prison. I'm an ex-gang member. I'm trying to change my life. He said, okay, can you pass the drug test? I said, yeah, of course. I'm in a halfway house. You can't be in a halfway house and take drugs. He said, okay, if you are dirty though, we can send you to a rehab and get you some help. I said, no, I can pass. He said, well, come back Monday and go through the orientation process and, you got a job. I took a deep breath and said, all right, thank you. And I was gonna walk out. He said, come here, give me a handshake. I gave him a handshake and he pulled me in and hugged me. And I'm stuck like, oh. So I hugged him back a little bit. I didn't know if it was all sincere. So when I walk out, dudes are smiling at me, people looking at me, and I'm like, this energy, this vibration, this love. I'm not understanding it, but I'm feeling it. Because I'm used to segregation. Whites over here in prison, blacks over here, Hispanics over here, natives over here, Asians over here. So my first encounter with an individual that wasn't a CO or a peace officer with a white man was with Father Greg. And it changed my whole perception of what love is. Love is not a color. Love is not judgment. Love is pure. Love is holy. Love is giving up yourself. And that's what Homeboy is giving to me. A job, a place to call home, a place to go and feel secure. And when I leave Homeboys, put on my backpack, navigate the bus system, And it's a scary world. I gotta get on the bus at 9:30 at night. But when I leave with that energy of homeboys. I leave with that love. And I leave with no fear because I know now that I've made it to where I'm supposed to be. And that's home at Homeboys. And all the therapeutic things that they give, talking to psychs, working, if you get overwhelmed by working, never having a job, I can leave my job, still get paid, love my paycheck, and go get some help and talk to my therapist, and come back and continue working. This is an environment that I never want to leave, but I know I'm going to have to move on one day. Something greater, because God got greater plans for all of us. And I want to thank y'all for hearing me and having me here tonight, and say God bless y'all.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jose Echeverria. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody for having us here and for coming out here to support us. That really means a lot to most of us here, watching a lot of us here, everybody, I'm pretty sure. For the choir, you guys are doing an amazing job. That's a good result. And for all the other organizations that are really trying to make a difference in the community, because that's pretty much what we need. Okay, my name is Jose Echeverria. I'm 36 years old. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, East Los Angeles. Well, my story is not too different from a lot of stories that we hear about. I have 5 sisters and a third brother. But for me, growing up was kind of difficult because there was a lot of violence in my home. My father was an alcoholic, and for the most part, I was come home and drunk, obviously, and beat up my mom. Continue with my sisters, and when he was done with them, if he wasn't satisfied, he would continue with me and my brothers. So for a long time, we were living in fear of my dad's action. Oh, sorry about that. So for a long time, we were living in fear because of my dad's actions, and I think it was like we were like around 10 or 11 years old when we tried to put a stop to it, and it kind of didn't work out. We got the meeting of a lifetime, and we were thrown out of the house, told never to return. So that's how it started for me in the streets. That's how I got introduced to the gang life, to the lifestyle, to drugs, and everything else about with that. The hardest thing I think I had to endure when I was a child was the fact that we lived probably like 4 or 5 houses away from the park, where me and my brother were standing out the house and we couldn't go home. And we would see my dad pass through the park almost on a daily basis, and he never pretty much looked back to see if we were doing all right or anything like that. So after that, it became our normal to be on the streets and to be running the streets with people that were older than us. And when we had anything to ask or ask for advice, we would turn to them. And the guidance wasn't always the best, and other times it had to be juvenile hall because of our action behind it, right? I grew up in a juvenile system. I got to go to school with juvenile hall. My high school diploma through juvenile hall. But then from there, it became prison. During the course of like being in juvenile hall, my brother got shot the first time we were 13 years old. We actually both got hit together. We both got shot together, but his was a little bit more severe, and it never stopped. The violence never stopped, so it was a little bit difficult for us growing up because just seeing a lot of my homeboys as a kid and everybody around us getting shot and dying, and we thought it was a part of normal to us. We thought it was normal, the way we were seeing everybody just getting hurt and all the violence and everything. So that's how we became. That's how we transformed our hurt and our pain, and that's how we became violent ourselves. And before we know it, we were in prison and doing the most throughout California prison and everything. Anyways, so I got involved in drugs heavily when I was like around 15 years old. And every time I would get out, that was the first thing I would do is go look for drugs, and I didn't know, like this last time I didn't know how to stop. It was been about 18 months. I've been clean for 18 months. And before that, I really didn't know how to stop. I was trying everything in my power to stop. I have a beautiful wife, by the way, that supports me and everything. And I've been with her for almost 13 years, been married for 8, but through everything, she has always been there for me. And I didn't know how to stop, and it was, I think like, probably like 2 years ago, I got shot, and I died twice at the hospital, was in a coma. I got out from the hospital, and I still went straight for the drugs, and it was crazy. I was out there running around for a whole year after that, getting high and everything, and I think a big part of what saved me was the fact that my wife never gave up on me. She never gave up on me. I knew that I couldn't get high at home. And I knew every time she would leave for work, I knew her hours and everything, so I would go home and take a shower and get some clothes or whatever, but I would always find a letter in my bed addressed to me, obviously, from my wife, telling me how much she loves me and how much she wants me to change and how much I mean to her and why am I killing myself and all that stuff with me, And I didn't know how to stop getting high. I tried everything in my power, I couldn't do it by myself. And at that time, I was fighting 2 cases, I was on 2 battles. And I had skipped court. I had skipped court on one of them, so I was sitting there thinking one day, and my wife was already like about to leave me. I walked up and her bags were packed and everything, and I was like, oh, is this really happening, you know what I mean? So I had to sit back and think about what's important for me and important in my life. By the way, I have 2 beautiful daughters too, a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old that I'm already building a relationship with because of my time in prison and all that. I was away from their life for a long time. And it's been kind of difficult, but at the same time, I know I can't give up on them. I'm going to be consistent in everything. I mean, eventually, I'll earn their love and their trust again, you know what I mean? So, back to my little story about when I was on bail, I skipped court, and I walked home one day, and her bags were packed, and I knew that she was about to leave me, and I was like, well, how can I make it better? She was like, I just want you to get off drugs. I want my husband. I want you to be the person that you were when I met you, you know what I mean? So I was like, all right, well, I knew the only way I was going to do it is if I butchered myself into the court system. That's something that I would never in my life do. Most of the time I was fleeing from going to jail or trying to avoid me going to jail, period. And this time I really had to think about it, so I did that. I went to court and I told the court system that I had a drug problem. I couldn't handle it, I was out of control, and if I could get some help. And they took me in, obviously, because I had a warrant. Not because, but they took me in because I had a warrant, but during that, I think that was like the best thing I could have did, because that's what saved my life, I think. It was a blessing in disguise, and I had talked to my wife, and I told my wife to give me, I called her when I was in jail, I told her to give me the opportunity that I had turned myself in, and that I wanted to get clean, and she's like, okay, well, we'll see how it goes, you know what I mean? So instead of them giving me prison time again, because that's what I was facing prison time again, I told my attorney straight up, like, I don't need prison, like, I've done prison enough times, I'm not going to prison, but it never helped me. I need a drug program, I need some assistance, I need some support, I need to build a foundation, and somewhere where I can learn about my drug addiction, you know what I mean? And surprisingly, the judge granted me a drug program. So I went to that drug program, I started working on myself, I started learning about the disease of addiction and everything. And I graduated from the program, and when I left, I felt like 26 years on the streets, running the streets, and whatever. 3 months wasn't going to be enough for me to be cured or healed. I need a lot of help. I had a lot of issues I had to deal with. So I called my wife and I told her to pick me up, and she happened to be at Home Industries taking her GED. And I had heard of Home Industries throughout my whole childhood because I grew up in the juvenile facility system. My father, great boy, used to always go there and do his ceremonies and everything. And so I knew about Home Industries. I just never wanted to stop by because I was in my addiction, or I wasn't always doing the right thing, you know what I mean? I didn't want to bring any negativity upon anybody. But during that time, I called her to pick me up, and then she picked me up, and she goes, well, what's next? What do you want to do next? And I told her, honestly, I want to go to Home Industry. I want to check it out because I know they'll help me with it. I know they got a lot of good services, and they got lots of offer, and I think it'll be a good place for me to start off at. So we did that. We walked into Home Industries, and just when I walked in there, just like warm welcoming, and everybody greeted me with smiling faces and everything. It was amazing. I felt like I never had that love in my life. I never felt that, and that's something I think I've been seeking my whole life. And I found it that I found like real love, real compassion, and real people trying to help sincerely, you know what I mean, without asking for anything in return. So I was amazed, I was surprised, and then I started assigning myself up for different classes or whatever, and I started working with a therapist. And it's because of that therapist that I can say today that I've been able to let go of a lot of the baggage I've been carrying my whole life. You know what I mean? I grew up hating my dad for obvious reasons. I've been talking for over 20 years. My dad passed away 2 years ago. I never talked to my mom pretty much most of my childhood or my sisters. But before my dad passed away, I was telling Father Greg today that I got to make amends with him. I sat there and I talked to him for like 2 hours and I got to forgive my dad for whatever he had to do. I have is not being there for my daughters like I should have been, because I know now that parenting is important and it's big, and we don't want our kids to grow up in the same system that we did. I definitely don't want my kids to grow up the same way I did. I have a good relationship with my mom today. My wife and me our marriage is at its best today. I talk to my sisters and I love my daughters, and I have them at my house on the regular now. And that's big to me. Like, that's big to me because I never had a family. Obviously, I've never really been even I was telling Father Greg that last year for Thanksgiving was my first time partying at church, and that was exciting to me. You know what I mean? For most of my Thanksgivings, I've been either in juvenile system or in prison, and even the food for Thanksgiving, I'm cool. I'd rather make me a little spread or something. You know what I mean? But it was amazing, and even for Christmas, because of home issues, I was able to earn paychecks and everything and save up a little bit of money. And for Christmas, we actually had a Christmas. We had a Christmas tree with games and everything, and it was amazing too. And I just want to say thank you for everybody. My name's Jose, and here's Father Greg.
Thank you, Jamal, for inviting us to not settle for the things that we've settled. And I've never heard mom as a verb, but it's, but Tamara, I think it's appropriate because, you do what moms do, you mom them. And that's what human beings really are called to do. Thank you, Larry and Jose, for traveling here in the dead of winter. I know how cold it is. Honest to God, you can barely go outside. I said, are you kidding? People in Chicago think this is the dead of spring. After, right in the middle of the Second Chances song, Jose leans in, he says, I've never heard a choir in person. And they're good. I always apologize because I feel like, people have heard me before, and like YouTube is the bane of my existence. I remember once I was invited to a foster grandparent gathering one summer. Well, I had spoken at it the summer before. I don't know why they invited me 2 summers in a row, but so after the second talk, a foster grandmother came up to me. I think she liked the talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands and she said, I heard you last year. It never gets better. Hoping she misspoke there. So here's why I think you're here tonight. There's so much goodness in this room. And you want the world to look differently than it currently looks. And you want your city and your block and your hood, and you want everything to look different and good for you. What you want to do is create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. You want to, together, imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And to that end, what you all want to do is respond to the invitations which were so eloquent tonight, to go someplace else where we don't settle for what has become normalized. You want to go to the margins, because if you stand at them, they disappear. We're used to, at the moment in our current time in which we live, we're used to circling the wagons, but we're invited to widen the circle. And so we go to the margins and we stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and we stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and we stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while we just feel this exquisite privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. We get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop.
Yeah.
And we choose to stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. Kinship is our goal, and if that were the case, I suspect we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating. For no kinship, no peace; no kinship, no justice; no kinship, no equality. Mother Teresa was right. The problem in the world is that we have forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? And we brace ourselves as we go to the margins, because people will accuse us and you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." We don't go to the margins to make a difference. We go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make us different.
Wow.
And none of that makes any damn sense at all unless we are anchored in a God we actually have. So I want to spend a couple seconds on that because we're in the church. I'm a Jesuit, and so St. Ignatius of Loyola always talked about the God that's always greater, more spacious and expansive. We don't want to settle for a partial God or for a puny God. I had a spiritual director once who said, "We need a better God than the one we have." He was a Jesuit. But it's true, because you can see it in our lives sometimes. When Dylan Roof killed all those folks in Mother Emanuel Church, and many of us remember that within a week's time, victims of the families of people who were killed stood in front of Dylan Roof and said, "We forgive you." And you remember the chill, and you felt like, wow, I'm in the presence of the God we actually have. But then cut to 9 months later, when they sentenced him to die and called it God's justice. We knew we had wandered back to the God we had settled for, the puny God, the partial God, the lesser God. We can't afford to do that. We always have to reach beyond so we can land at the spacious place. Meister Eckhart, a theologian and mystic, always used to say, "It is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you." believe it. It's the God that wants to mom us. But we don't believe it. And yet we're invited to that all the time. The homies always expand my way of thinking, help me move beyond the mind I have. A lot of times they do it by mangling the English language, which I always find illuminating. I had a homegirl named Lisa who came into my office. She wanted to introduce her man to me, and it was at the end of the day. She was a gang member trainee in our program. And she brings him into my office. She says, "This is my sufficient other." I said, "No doubt." What allows me to be here with Larry and Jose is that I have a CEO, who kind of runs the place, and we're a $20 million annual operation, and so it's a heavy lift. I'm glad to have somebody doing it after I've been doing it for 30 years. And so I had a homie come in, kind of, distressed, a homie who was a trainee. Early in the morning, the day was beginning. He said, "Damn, gee, my lady, she's in a bad mood today." I said, "Why?" "Well, she's beginning her administration period." I said, "Well, I just finished mine, so I kind of know what she's going through." But my favorite one happened at San Fernando Juvenile Hall at the big gym where I was presiding on a Sunday morning, and 500 gang members, and I'm vested in my alb and my stole, and I'm sitting on a folding chair, and they have these sheets that have the readings in English and Spanish, and so it's resting on my lap, and the homies are getting up and doing the reading. So the first guy did the first reading, and then the second guy got up to do the psalm response, and I could sense an overabundance of confidence in his voice, and he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I looked at the sheet, what the hell? And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Because if we're honest with ourselves, the exalted God is the God we've created in our own image. Because all of us, if we were God, that's what we would want. But the exhausted God is generous. It's not about him, it's about you. It's spacious, it's expansive, and it is a better God than the one we have. My friend Anne Lamott always says, you've created God in your own image, but God hates the same people you do. So we want to move beyond that, for it is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. So not too long ago, I buried my 92-year-old mother, and she had 8 kids. And I buried my dad about 25 years ago. And she was sharp till the day she died in her own home, in her own bed. And in fact, she was so sharp. She watched so much MSNBC that she was becoming Rachel Maddow. And she wasn't a lick afraid of dying. You know, a couple of weeks before she died, she said to me, "I've never done this before." And it was like skydiving, you know. And in fact, her last words to me were the day before she died, and I happened to be alone there with her, and she was asleep. When she woke up, she saw me, and she said, "Oh, for crying out." But she was pissed off because she wasn't dead. Sorry. myself and my sisters went out to get lunch, and she was asleep, and at noon, exactly at noon, she opened her eyes, and she let out this wondrous, glorious, delighting gasp. And she left us. And no one in earshot of the sound could ever be afraid of death again. But I mention all that because in the last weeks of her life, there'd be 2 of us or 4 of us or all 8 of us around her bed, and she'd be in and out of consciousness. But when she opened her eyes, she'd lock on to just one of us. And she'd say with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And after I buried her, I realized that that is the singular agenda of our God. Now I mention this because it's consequential if we believe that to be the case. Because you cannot mom somebody else unless you know that that's the only agenda. Not disappointment, not please measure up, not you again, no. It is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort us. And so we receive the tender glance of God, and we choose to be that tender glance of God in the world. Will that end violence in Chicago? Of course it will. It's not complicated as Tamar said. It's not as complicated as we think it is. That is about choosing to be in the world who God is. Compassionate, loving kindness. And that is consequential. We all want to do something, and we all want to serve. But service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom, which is the place of connection and exquisite mutuality. Don't settle for less than that. But there's a trap in it because there's a distance in service. And you want to bridge that. Service provider, service recipient. No. You want to bridge even that distance. I remember I was in Houston and giving a talk, and a hardcore gang intervention worker who had been to prison and now working with gang members on the streets, he pleaded with me and he said, "How do you reach them?" And I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Can you receive who they are? Can you allow them to touch and alter your heart forever? One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, the great farm worker organizer. And he was the best listener I've ever been in the presence of. If you were talking to him, nobody else existed. He was laser beam focused. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. He received you. He allowed himself to be reached by you. But famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar shrugged and smiled and said, "The feeling's mutual." And that's the hope. That's where we want to wind up in the community of kinship. I remember No Homie found more job opportunities than this guy we all called Dreamer. And he grew up in the projects where I was pastor and got into a gang, and he's doing okay now. He's in his early 40s and has a job and married and a house and kids. But in his early 20s, he was kind of a yo-yo. He was in and out of being locked up and I'd hire him in one of our 9 social enterprises, or I would find a job for him in the private sector. And he would always gravitate back to vague criminality, something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of, and then he'd wander back to me. And it was a pattern that repeated itself quite a bit. And so this one time he finished a 4-month stretch of probation violation, and there he was sitting in front of my desk, and he says what gang members often say, "This time, it'll be different." And I said, well, okay. So with him sitting there, I picked up the phone, called a friend of mine named Gary, who owned a vending machine company, and he had hired homies in the past. So I'm hoping against hope, maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, he says, "You tell that guy he can start tomorrow." That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again in front of my desk. I couldn't believe my eyeballs. I said, "Híjole, Madre Santa, here we go all over again." But this time he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck and he waves it proudly and he says, "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper." I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. That's right, that would be God. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh. God's number one. You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. I'm sorry, them Genesis days. He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. The thing I most remember was the two of us, we literally fell out of our chairs. We were just howling with laughter. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider and who's the service recipient. It's mutual. So Homeboy was born a long time ago when I was pastor of the parish, Dolores Mission, the poorest parish in the city of LA, nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens, Aliso Village. It was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, which is unheard of in public housing to have so many. The LAPD called it the highest place of the highest concentration of gang activity in Los Angeles was my parish. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 227th 3 months ago. Not all from that community, but I run a large gang intervention program. I get asked to do it. So the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, so they were wreaking havoc in the middle of the day. They were violent, they were selling drugs, they were writing on the walls. So I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them. And I'd say, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, you know, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, you know, so that sort of forced my hand. So across the street from the church is our elementary parochial school, grades K to 8, which they occupy the first 2 floors. But the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the nuns lived. And so I gathered all the sisters in the living room one night and I sat them down and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And they looked at each other and they said, sure. And that was the extent of their entire discernment process. And so gang members came in very large numbers to our church property, which created a disconnect, of course, because parishioners started to say, wait a minute. Aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and the bad people out, which was a good gospel challenge. And then the homie said if only we had jobs, and so myself and the women in the parish, we marched around the factories that surrounded the projects trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we invented things like a maintenance crew, landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members. And then in 1992, after the unrest in Los Angeles, which followed the Rodney King verdict, every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles ignited. But the poorest parish in the city didn't, and so the LA Times wanted to investigate this. So they asked me, why did I think we didn't ignite? And I said, maybe partly it's because we had 60 strategically hired gang members, rivals, enemies, who were working together. They had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appeared, and then a movie producer named Ray Stark read it, and he happened to have $500 million. So he summoned me, and he said, what should I do with my money? And I can see now that I woefully undershot my request. I was young. So I said, across the street from the school is an abandoned Torah bakery, but it has ovens. We could fix the ovens. We could paint the place. We could put hairnets on rival enemy gang members. They could bake bread. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. That was the absolute extent of my business plan. And he said, sure. So we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas at the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries. Not everything worked. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do such a thing, and certainly we didn't at Homeboy, but we backed our way, we evolved our way into now becoming the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to reimagine their futures, and it's a place of healing, as Larry and Jose talked about. And our secret sauce really is a community of tenderness where people can find some relief from their chronic toxic stress, and then they can do the work, and then they can find resilience, and then they become the sanctuary that they sought in us. And then they take that sanctuary home and they present it to their kids, and for the first time, a cycle gets broken. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang, always fleeing something.
Yeah.
That's a good diagnosis. Nobody's ever met a good treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. Gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery. And everybody knows that misery loves company. Kids who join gangs, there's only 3 profiles. It's the despondent kid who can't imagine tomorrow. Or it's the traumatized kid who can't see his way clear to transform his pain, so he keeps inflicting it. Or it's the mentally ill kid. But if we knew that as a society, what would we do? We would infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign. We would help heal damage with tenderness. And we would deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. So Homeboy is the front porch of a world we all long for, a place of tenderness. For every homie and homegirl who walks through those doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And only tenderness can scale that wall. Jean Bonnier of the L'Arche movement says that tenderness is the highest form of spiritual maturity. And I think he's right. And so we have our 9 social enterprises: Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, Homeboy Farmers Markets. We have Homeboy Diner, the only place you can buy food at City Hall in LA. We have a restaurant at Terminal 4 at LAX Airport. Homeboy Grocery, where we sell chip sauces and guacamole in grocery stores. We have Homeboy Recycling, electronic waste. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. I invite you to go there. Anytime you go in there, you can run into a celeb or an elected official. Jim Carrey is there often, and Jack Black, and Forrest Whitaker. And even Vice President Joe Biden was there when he was vice president, with motorcade and Secret Service and selfies with Uncle Joe. Most famously, Diane Keaton came, who was an Oscar winner, movie star, Godfather movies. Her waitress was Glenda. Glenda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, felon, parolee. She has no idea who Diane Keaton is. And so Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 dishes she particularly likes. And Diane Keaton says, well, I'll have that second one. That one sounds really good. And it's at that moment, for some reason, something dawns on Glenda, and she looks at Diane Keaton. She says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton deflects it humbly. Oh, gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. Took my breath away. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings. Now that I think of it. Suddenly kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind, and it comes by way of Jesus, who says that you will be one, that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential, but it's really about us. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate?
Yes.
All of us are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. We're just completely allergic to the notion of asking homies holding the bar up and asking them to measure up. And the main reason is because our exhausted God doesn't do that with us. Instead, we show up and we tell them the truth. We hold the mirror up and we say, you are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. Like the Buddhist texts that often begin with, "O nobly born, remember who you really are." Folks become and inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No four prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it is huge. But you have to reach in at Homeboy all the time and dismantle messages of shame and disgrace.
Yeah.
You have to scale the wall with tenderness. For the principal suffering of the poor in history and in Scripture is shame and disgrace. The Acts of the Apostles has a very odd line, and it says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Which is what I was thinking when Jamal was speaking. Some years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And it was an all-day, 9 to 5 gang in-service in a hotel ballroom, and social workers are going to learn about gangs. And so I figured maybe I'd be the keynote, or maybe I speak at lunch, or maybe I speak to close the thing. So I said, yes, I want my ticket. A week before I was to fly, I pulled the letter out, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker all damn day, from 9 to 5. And I said to myself, oh, hell no. So I called 2 homies in, Andre, African-American gang member who worked in the bakery, and Jose, who was a trainee also, but he was working in the substance abuse team. And they've been trainees for like 6-8 months or so. I sat them down in my office, said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass date to But I never heard their stories, and Jose got up first, and 25 years old, and gang member, been to prison, tattooed. But he was, as I mentioned, he was becoming a very valued member of our substance abuse team, solid in his own recovery, now helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. But he also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers did what you just did. They gasped. And then he said, it sounds way worser in Spanish. We got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued. I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door. The guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. And second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. So let me end with one last story. And a prelude to the story was I was being interviewed on the Christian Broadcasting Network by this nice lady, and she asked me what we do at Homeboy, and I told her about classes and case management and free tattoo removal. I didn't mention that. We have a clinic with 47 volunteer doctors and 11,000 tattoo treatments a year, and about our 9 social enterprises, and about enemy gangs of members working side by side, making croissants, you know. So I spent some time giving the litany of what we do. But when I finished, she kind of looked at me and she said, yeah, but how much time each day do you spend at Homeboy Industries, you know, praising God? And I didn't know what to say, so I said, all damn day. And I don't think she liked that answer. But it begs this last question, so I'll tell you a last story. What kind of praise does our exhausted God have any interest in? So it occurs sometimes to universities in particular to force their students to read my books against their will. And so my alma mater, Gonzaga, which ruined my bracket, they invited me to speak because they had forced the incoming freshman class to read Tattoos on the Heart. So they would have a big Tuesday night, 1,000 people, and I said sure, and they said, could you bring 2 homies with you? And I always do if people are going to pay for it, and I always pick homies, generally speaking, this way. I usually pick rivals, enemies, just to force them to share a hotel room together. And I almost always pick somebody who's never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. A number of years ago, I had two older vatos, and we were at LAX waiting to fly to DC. Dead serious, the homie said to me, "Hey G, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time?" Yeah, it's a requirement. We'll be flying home in America. So I picked two homies, Bobby, African-American gang member, and Mario, Latino gang member. Both of them worked as trainees at our place. And I've done this hundreds of times, maybe closer to 1,000 times, with men and women. And I've never picked anybody like this guy, Mario, who was absolutely petrified, horrified, terrified of flying. In fact, it was starting to freak me out a little bit. And he was hyperventilating. And we hadn't even boarded the plane. And so we go to Burbank Airport, which is kind of a small airport, big bay windows, Southwest Airlines. They don't have that hermetically sealed chute where you board the plane. You have to walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president and climb up the stairs, front of the plane, and there's stairs at the back of the plane. So Bobby's off walking in the airport, and I'm trying to calm Mario down. And our plane arrives early morning, and people are deplaning. And Mario, that's going to be our plane. Wow, we may die before we actually climb those stairs. And then I see our flight crew arrives, and the pilots, and there are two flight attendants, females, and both of them have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and the two of them are schlepping up the steps to board the plane. And Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" And I said, "Well, as soon as they sober up the pilots." There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. But I should tell you that Mario, in our 31-year history as an organization, is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked there, which is saying something. He's all sleeved out, his neck is blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's lying in his coffin, there won't be any doubt. So I'm trying to calm him down, so I'm walking him through the airport. I've never been in public with him, and people are like, mothers are clutching their kids very closely, and I'm thinking that's interesting, because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow, walk up to anybody there and say, "Quick, who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here?" They won't say me. They'll say Mario. He's a waiter in our restaurant. Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, there's Big Talk Tuesday night. What they don't tell you is they have 93 other talks planned during the day. All these classes and meetings and lunchtime talks. And so I tell them I'm not going to speak at any of those. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. You guys get up, tell your stories. And they do a good job, but Mario in particular is quite terrified of doing this, but he does a good job. But there's stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I wouldn't have survived a single day of either of their childhoods. So we get to the venue, and I ask the two of them to get up and speak, and then I do my thing. So then I invite them up for question and answer, and kind of informal, even with the large crowd. And, yes, ma'am. And a woman stands and she says, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. Mario is a tall, skinny drink of water, and he's clutching the microphone. He's just terrified. Yes. And she says, well, you say you're a father and you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone even more intently, and he's starting to tremble, and he's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he wants to say. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone clutching, closed-eyed refuge. And now I know he's losing his battle with his tears, but he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry, and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And let there be no doubt that everybody standing had been returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us, because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in.
Yeah.
Folks at the margins make us different. And pretty soon we cease to care if anyone accuses us of wasting our time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Allow those voices to be heard, and allow those voices to reach you. Thank you very much.
I have any mascara left on. Wow. I just thank you doesn't really do it. Thank you is not enough. I want to thank all of our speakers here tonight. Father Kelly, Jamal. We can't thank Tamar because she ran in here and said, right after I speak, I gotta go because I'm on the block tonight. So I don't know what better example there is of that. Wow. So let's talk about getting to the ballroom. On the back of your program, like I said, are all the organizations, some of our partners here tonight who have websites, you know how to get in touch with them. Jamal and his crew and Precious Blood have brought some of their items here tonight. Please come take a look. They have things for sale, general donations. We want to thank St. Barnabas, Christ the King, St. Walter, and Mercy Home for Boys and Girls for sponsoring tonight. Beverly Area Planning Association, Bookies, and Metra gave us their parking lot. St. Barnabas Music Ministry for sharing their gifts. Chi-Town Printing, our union shop that for the 3rd year in a row has given us our buttons for free. Please wear them as ambassadors of that message of we all belong to one another. The many volunteers, our students, community members, my random gainer uncles and cousins who maybe parked you tonight directionally, and finally our co-host, Southside Catholic Peace and Justice Committee. If you're from a parish on the south side and would like to join our quest of getting back to the original program, see any of our members, they have name tags on in the back. And if you're curious what disrupting violence looks like on a daily basis, we have a bunch of pictures from our partners up in the back. There's refreshments, feel free to stick around, meet your neighbors, and thank you so much for coming.